Good evening. The room service around here is terribly slow, which is why I'm a little bit late. Sorry about that. But finally, room service has listened to my cries and brought me some drinks. And I have to say, I very much associate, for some reason, being in a hotel, G&T in a can. Obviously, that's how classy I am when I stay in a hotel. And that association in a hotel. It was with Patrick Gale down in Exeter when we were at a really lovely literary event. And we did a little in bed with Patrick Gale session, which is to be found still on my YouTube channel. And we did share a G&T after our lovely live Instagram session, which was all about talking about his books and why they're so brilliant bibliotherapeutically. So I do apologise for being a little bit chaotic tonight, but you just can't get the service these days in the hotels that I stay in, namely my house. And that's why I'm taking you tonight to some fictional hotels, because I would love to go and stay in a hotel. And thinking about camping last week on my Wednesday night session made me realise that I would actually love to go and stay in a hotel rather than camp, much though I do love a bit of camping. But sometimes it's just great to get into those crisp, white, perfect sheets. I'm just readjusting my phone so that I can be at a better angle for Instagram viewers. And I'd love to know if you have any favourite hotels in literature, and if so, which? There's always a few that very much come to mind when you think about hotels in literature. Obviously, The Shining is one of the ones that very much comes to prominence. But there's also many another literary hotel that we're going to talk about tonight. And if you have any favourites, do share them with me. Send me a message on Instagram, send me an email on ellabear2@gmail.com, or send me a message on Facebook too. All of those will get through to me, though they may not happen immediately. But I'd love to hear if you have favourite hotels in literature. And when you think about hotels in literature, do you think of the sinister hotels, or do you think of the more gorgeous, lovely, kind, friendly hotels? What I was really looking for in hotels in literature was beautiful vistas, lovely, gorgeous places to stay and escape from it all. And that actually doesn't seem to happen very much in hotels in literature. We tend to have more murders happening if it comes to Agatha Christie, or dastardly events in many of the hotels that I'm going to be talking about tonight. But I'm going to leap in with The Hotel New Hampshire by John Irving, which many of you might well have read, which is a really fantastic book. I don't have the physical book to show you, but he's also famous for The World According to Garp and A Prayer for Owen Meany. And he is one of those people that, if you have read one of his books, you tend to be an uber fan, particularly if you read it in your younger days, because there's something totally addictive about his writing, and incredibly exhilarating and sympathetic. He has incredibly sympathetic characters. Nat is mentioning Hotel du Lac with a lovely vista, which is indeed a fantastic novel, set almost entirely in a hotel, and that is a great novel with a hotel theme, which we're going to come to a little bit later. So thank you for that. So Hotel New Hampshire, it's one of Irving's sweeping modern Dickensian novels, following the various dramas of a family in two separate hotels, each called the Hotel New Hampshire. Often I do find that John Irving's books are quite sprawling and complex, but They are soap operas that are totally addictive, and you just want to know what's going to happen. And you really get to know and love those characters. Among a huge cast, there's an author who kills herself as a result of writer's block, which can be a bit off putting if you are a writer thinking about going to stay in a hotel, which I'm not, so that's okay. Um, so it was written in 1981, The Hotel New Hampshire, centering on a quirky family from New Hampshire and the hotel that brought them all together one fateful summer. Critics praised the book for how it balances emotional resonance against its witty and comedic themes, which is very much, again, typical of John Irving, the writer, because he is incredibly emotional and very funny. He's also famous, by the way, for the Cider House Rules, and lots of his books have been made into films too. So the central characters in the book belong to the Berry family, comprising Wyn and Mary, who are husband and wife, and their 5 children, Frank, Franny, John, Lily, and Egg. John, who's the middle child, narrates the story. He knows that his parents and his siblings are eccentric, but he loves them for it, and he wants to make his family proud. Closest to his sister Franny, he tells her all his secrets. So Wyn and Mary both grew up in Derry, New Hampshire, and one summer they worked at the same resort hotel in Maine. They fell in love and were engaged before the summer ended. So romantic. Their favourite colleague was a man called Freud, who worked as the resort handyman. Freud owned a bear called State of Maine, which he eventually sold to Wyn, and this bear does come into play later on too. Wyn brought the bear because he planned to tour the country, staging performances to raise enough money to study at Harvard, which is a pretty crazy way to raise money, but why not? His bear act was a success, and he does succeed in graduating from Harvard a few years later. Maybe I should try that as a fundraising activity. Interesting. Although he now has a good job teaching young boys at a Derry prep school, he feels incomplete and unfulfilled. One day, Wyn decides to buy an abandoned girls' school and convert it into a hotel, which is a great idea. He calls it the Hotel New Hampshire. They employ a middle-aged woman, Rhonda Ray, good name, to work as the housekeeper. She flirts with John, taking advantage of his naivety. They start sleeping together, but John keeps it a secret. So I won't go into the whole shebang of the plot, but it is, as you can tell from that brief beginning of the synopsis, a really interesting and convoluted and exciting plot. But intriguingly, Freud, who we met earlier and who sold the bear to Wyn, goes to live in Vienna, and he invites the family to come to Vienna to get to look after a hotel that he now owns. However, when the family arrive in Vienna, they realise that Freud isn't the man he once was. The woman called Susie, dressed up as a pet bear, all somewhat worrying. He calls her his smart bear. And now that Freud is blind, it's unclear if he knows that Susie is a human playing dress up, or if he is senile in his old age. All deeply bizarre. Wyn regrets his decision to move the family to Vienna, not surprisingly, when he sees the hotel. Prostitutes occupy one floor and violent communists live on the other. Wyn knows this is no place for children, but he doesn't know where else to go. And meanwhile, the children make their own relationships with and at the hotel, which is all very interesting. The hotel, of course, itself does become an important character within the novel. And I won't give it all away, but in a nutshell, it's a gripping, brilliant, and fascinating novel, which is a great introduction to the work of John Irving if you haven't read him already. So that's kind of a book where the hotels within the book are really interesting characters in themselves with their own personalities, and each of the characters in the book develops a different relationship with the hotel. I'm just going to take off my rather hot dressing gown because I am in my hotel gear, I hope you'll notice, with my very representational pajamas, the kind of thing I feel that my mum might have worn when she would have stayed at a hotel back in the 80s. And I'm just going to give you a little toast with my room service cocktail. Great to see you here this evening, everyone. And don't forget to send me messages if you have any of your favourite hotels that I haven't mentioned yet. So I am going to be leaping around a bit from hotel to hotel. And I also wondered when thinking about the topic whether I should be allowed to mention backpacking type places to stay as well. And I think I should, because some of those are really rather brilliantly written in various books that I was thinking about today. So, Psycho by Robert Bloch is another book which underwent a notorious transition to the screen, in this case with a screechy soundtrack, a wily campaign of hyperbole by Hitchcock, and a then unprecedented depiction of someone in the shower. Everybody knows about that scene in the shower, I would imagine. But the book reveals much more about Norman Bates's terrifying mind and still delivers potent suspense and horror, even when you've seen Hitchcock's version. So that's for the strong of heart if you fancy reading a book with a terrifying hotel scene. Psycho by Robert Bloch, which everybody forgets was a book before it was made into the infamous and famous film by Hitchcock. Of course, we must mention The Shining by Stephen King, which is probably the most famous of all hotel novels, I might suggest, because the whole book takes place in the Overlook Hotel, where slowly Jack goes a little bit insane, in fact, completely insane, because he sees and talks to ghosts within the hotel. And his son Danny does have the shining, which is an ability to see, understand telepathically what's going on in other people's minds. And it is actually a really fantastic and brilliant novel, which I would highly recommend if you haven't ever read it. The film is utterly terrifying, probably one of the most terrifying films I've ever seen. But the book has a lot of really fantastic insights into what it might be to be the little boy Danny experiencing the horrors of what's going on in the hotel and what's happening in the minds of other people, because Danny can get into their minds. But I'm going to read you a really great scene which people that have seen the film will probably know, but I do think it's brilliantly written by Stephen King. He went downstairs to the ground floor, stood aimlessly by the lobby desk for a moment, and then turned right. He went into the dining room and stood just inside the door. The empty tables, their white linen cloths neatly cleaned and pressed beneath their clear plastic covers, glimmered up at him. All was deserted now, but dinner will be served at 8 p.m. Unmasking and dancing at midnight. Jack walked among the tables, momentarily forgetting his wife and son upstairs, forgetting the dream, the smashed radio, the bruises. He trailed his fingers over the slick plastic dust covers, trying to imagine how it must have been on that hot August night in 1945. The war won, the future stretching ahead, so various and new, like a land of dreams. The bright and party-coloured Japanese lanterns hung the whole length of the circular drive, the golden yellow light spilling from these high windows that were now drifted over with snow. Men and women in costume, here a glittering princess, there a high-booted cavalier, flashing jewellery and flashing wit everywhere, dancing, liquor flowing freely, first wine and then cocktails, and then perhaps boilermakers, the level of conversation going up and up until the jolly cry rang out from the bandmaster's podium, the cry of Unmask! Unmask! And the Red Death held sway. He found himself standing on the other side of the dining room, just outside the stylized bat-wing doors of the Colorado Lounge, where, on that night in 1945, all the booze would have been free. Belly up to the bar, partner, the drinks are on the house. He stepped through the batwings and into the deep folded shadows of the bar. And a strange thing occurred. He had been in here before, once to check the inventory sheet Ullman had left, and he knew the place had been stripped clean. The shelves were totally bare, but now he lit only murkily by the light which filtered through from the dining room, which was itself only dimly lit because of the snow blocking the windows. He thought he saw ranks and ranks of bottles twinkling mutedly behind the bar, and siphons, and even beer dripping through the spigots of all three highly polished taps. Yet he could even smell beer. That damp and fermented and yeasty odour, no different from the smell that had hung finely misted around his father's face every night when he came home from work. Eyes widening, he fumbled for the wall switch, and the low, intimate bar lighting came on, circles of 20-watt bulbs implanted on the top of the three wagon wheel chandeliers overhead. The shelves were all empty. They had not even as yet gathered a good coat of dust. The beer taps were dry, as were the chrome drains beneath them. To his left and right, the velvet-upholstered booths stood like men with high backs, each one designed to give a maximum of privacy to the couple inside. Straight ahead, across the red-carpeted floor, 40 bar stools stood behind the horseshoe-shaped bar. Each stool was upholstered in leather and embossed with cattle brands: Circle H, Bardy Bar, Rocking W, Lazy B. Then we get the really sinister bit. "Hi, Lloyd," he said. "A little slow tonight, isn't it?" Lloyd said it was. Lloyd asked him what it would be. "Now, I'm really glad you asked me that," Jack said. "Really glad. Because I happen to have 2 20s and 2 10s in my wallet, and I was afraid they'd be sitting right here until sometime next April. There isn't a 7-Eleven around here, would you believe it? And I thought they had 7-Elevens on the fucking moon." Lloyd sympathized. "So here's what," Jack said. "You set me up an even 20 martinis. An even 20. Just like that. Kazang. One for every month I've been on the wagon, and one to grow on. You can do that, can't you? You aren't too busy?" Lloyd said he wasn't busy at all. "Good man. You line those Martians up right along the bar, and I'm going to take them down one by one. White man's burden, Lloyd, my man." Lloyd turned to do the job. Jack reached into his pocket for his money clip and came out with an Excedrin bottle instead. His money clip was on the bedroom bureau, and of course his skinny Shank's wife had locked him out of the bedroom. "Nice going, Wendy, you bleeding bitch." "I seem to be momentarily light," Jack said. "How's my credit in this joint, anyhow?" Lloyd said his credit was fine. I won't go on because it's a long scene, but it's incredibly chilling. Just reading that, a couple of pages, having picked it up after years of not reading it, sent a shiver down my spine as I picture Jack in that bar talking to Lloyd the ghost, who's setting up imaginary drinks for Jack, for him to then drink in his imaginary vivid soul, and eventually the line between reality and ghosts becomes unbearably blurred. So that's the Overlook Hotel in The Shining by Stephen King, which is probably the all-time most terrifying hotel in the whole of literature. If any of you know any scarier ones, do let me know. But I do think that it is an absolutely brilliant book, and one which I would very much recommend reading, particularly if you are looking for a bit of a shiver down the spine, and it's really vivid and superb. Another novel which is not so terrifying, but a great read and with a really great hotel in it is Evil Under the Sun by Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie did love a lovely hotel or a beautiful place to go and stay. Frequently it was a hotel or a B&B kind of place. She was one of literature's great users of hotels as a backdrop for Maleficence. A good number of her novels see a chambermaid dropping a tea tray in shock after gaining entry to the room of a newly dead guest. It's quite a common trope in an Agatha Christie novel. And in this one, Poirot is hoping for a quiet holiday, but as in every other situation where Poirot is hoping for a quiet holiday, he gets embroiled in a devilish murder. That's Evil Under the Sun by Agatha Christie. Great read and also really superb film made in the 1980s, which I'd highly recommend, with Maggie Smith and Peter Ustinov as Poirot. So, other great hotel novels. I'm going to come to some more actual hotels, but I did want to just throw in a backpacking hostel, which is a really superb hotel scene at the beginning of The Beach by Alex Garland, which I'm sure a lot of you probably read when it first came out. I think it was 20 years ago. Just trying to look it up. Alex Garland, born in 1970, first published 1996, more than 20 years ago. So The Beach has been made into a fantastic film, but of course the novel is a million times better. Really great read, utterly gripping, and still very fresh. It definitely stands up to this day. I suppose the only major difference now is that people don't have mobile phones. And there's one of the most brilliantly awful hotel scenes in this novel, which I've read, because the guy who's the hero turns up in Bangkok and he's gone to stay in a random hostel that he knows nothing about. And he then has this really terrible night, which sets the scene for the rest of the novel, because the guy that he meets gives him a map to the beach with an X marking the spot. But I'll read you the bit about the hotel because it's a really great scene. I'd landed at Bangkok in the late afternoon, and by the time I got to Khao San, it was dark. My taxi driver winked and told me that at one end of the street was a police station, so I asked him to drop me off at the other end. I wasn't planning on crime, but I wanted to oblige his conspiratorial charm. Not that it made much difference which end one stayed, because the police obviously weren't active. I caught the smell of grass as soon as I got out of the cab, and half the travellers weaving past me were stoned. He left me outside a guest house with an eating area open to the street. As I studied it, checking the clientele to gauge what kind of place it was, a thin man at the table nearest me leant over and touched my arm. I glanced down. He was, I guessed, one of the heroin hippies that float around India and Thailand. He'd probably come to Asia 10 years ago and turned an occasional dabble into an addiction. His skin was old, although I'd have believed he was in his 30s. The way he was looking at me, I had the feeling I was being sized up as someone to rip off. "What?" I said warily. He pulled an expression of surprise and held up the palms of his hands. Then he curled his finger and thumb into the O-shaped perfection sign and pointed into the guest house. "It's a good place?" He nodded. I looked again at the people round the tables. They were mostly young and friendly looking, some watching the TV and some chattering over their dinner. "Okay," I smiled at him, in case he wasn't a heroin addict, just a friendly mute. "I'm sold." We just skip ahead a little bit to the night time. On my ceiling was a fan, strong enough to stir in the air on full setting. For a while I did nothing but lie on the bed and look up at it. It was calming, following the revolutions, and with the mixture of heat and soft breeze, I felt I could drift asleep. That suited me. West to east is the worst for jet lag, and it would be good to fall into the right sleeping pattern on the first night. I switched off the light. There was a glow from the corridor, and I could still see the fan. Soon I was asleep. Once or twice I was aware of people in the corridor, and I thought I heard the French couple coming back, then leaving again. But the noises never. I was always able to slip back into the dream I'd been having before, until I heard the man's footsteps. They were different, too creepy to doze through. They had no rhythm or weight and dragged on the floor. A muttered stream of British swear words floated into my room as he jiggled the padlock on his door. Then there was a loud sigh, the lock opened with a click, and his light came on. The mosquito netting cast a patterned shadow on my ceiling. Frowning, I looked at my watch. It was 2 in the morning, early evening UK time. I wondered if I might get back to sleep. The man slumped onto his bed, making the wall between us shake alarmingly. He coughed for a while. Then I heard the rustle of a joint being rolled. Soon there was blue smoke caught in the light, rolling through the netting. Aside from the occasional deep exhalation, he was silent. I drifted back to sleep. Almost. Bitch, said a voice. I opened my eyes. Fucking bitch. We're both as good as... The voice paused for a coughing fit. Dead. I was wide awake now, so I sat up in bed. Cancer in the corals, blue water, my bitch. Fucking Christ did me in, the man continued. He had an accent, but at first my sleep-fogged head couldn't place it. Bitch, he said again, spitting out the word. Sorry about my lack of accent. A Scottish accent. Beach. There was a scrabbling sound on the wall. For a moment I thought he might be trying to push it over, and I had a vision of myself being sandwiched between the formica board and the bed. Then his head appeared through the mosquito netting, silhouetted, facing me. Hey, he said. I didn't move. I was sure he couldn't see into my room. Hey, I know you're listening. In there. I know you're awake. He lifted up a finger and gave the netting an exploratory poke. It popped away from where it was stapled to the formica. His hand stuck through. Here! A glowing red object sailed through the darkness, landing on the bed in a little shower of sparks. The joint he'd been smoking. I grabbed it to stop it burning the sheets. I will leave you at that exciting moment, but what happens next, just to give you a little bit of an intro, because it's right at the beginning of the book, is the guy tells him that the guy is accusing him of listening in and saying, what did you hear? What did you hear? And then they end up stopping their chat. The hero tries to go back to sleep. He hears the French couple on the other side of him having sex and eventually manages to drift off after that. And then the next day, he is given a copy of the map, which the man next to him had, which is a map to the beach. And that guy, it turns out, has killed himself. There's a knife next to his bed. There's blood all over the room. And it is a mystery. Has he killed himself or has he not? And why did he give the copy of the map to our hero? So that's a really hideous hotel scene, which I wouldn't wish on any of you. Many of you who might have backpacked around the world might have had similar moments when you've stayed in some dodgy hotel and been able to hear the people next door to you in various ways. And that's the opposite of the kind of hotel that I was looking for when I embarked on this venture this evening. But it is a very exciting novel, and our hero then goes on many adventures as he searches for this mythical beach, which is surrounded by azure waters, and it is a really good ride that he goes on. So I would thoroughly recommend that as a great read. I must also mention a really lovely book by Deborah Mogach called These Foolish Things, also known as The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, which is another really great read of a much lighter and more entertaining and enjoyable nature rather than the beach, which is brilliant but dark. So, The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel is a book that became a lovable film. It deals with the Indian adventures of a cast of retired characters rebelling, some more successfully than others, against the coming of old age and the consequences of their decisions. It's a very funny, very charming, very lovely book, which I would thoroughly recommend to either read or listen to. And the hotel in that book is in India, and it's a rather charming place, just like this pink gin. I feel this is the kind of drink that one might have in the best exotic marigold hotel. Isn't it nice to fantasize about what we'd all be? Could we go and stay in them now? It's been a long time since I stayed in a hotel, but I do believe I might be going to Sharjah in a couple of weeks' time on a bibliotherapy conference. So I will get to stay in a hotel there. If I can, I'll do a live from there, but I don't know how easy it is to do a live from the Emirates because I know they have various restrictions on video and Wi Fi. So we'll see. If not, I will make a video and put it out there. So, another fantastic hotel novel that I very deeply love is Hotel World by Ali Smith, which is a strange, beautiful, dreamlike novel with five disparate voices who inhabit her mesmerizing and rather tragic hotel. It's set in a luxuriously anonymous global hotel in an unnamed English northern city. And the disembodied yet interconnected characters include there's five different voices in this book. And there's the 19-year-old chambermaid who's recently died at the hotel. She's called Sarah. Her bereaved sister, Claire, who visits the scene of Clara's death, which was in the hotel. Penny, an advertising copywriter who's staying in the room opposite. Lise, the global hotel's depressed receptionist. And the homeless Else, or Elsa, who begs on the street outside. Smith's ambitious prose explores all facets of language and its uses. Sarah takes us through the moment of her exit from the world and beyond. It's her desperate fading grip on words and senses that begins the novel, and she's searching for the meaning of her death in what she calls the lift for dishes because she's slowly losing her ability to have a total grip on language as she fades away from existence. So I love this book because there's five different voices. They're all very differently written in a very typical Ali Smith way. It's a postmodern novel. And the first voice is the voice of the ghost, Sarah, who has just died because, without giving too much of the plot away, she actually climbed into a dumb waiter, really for a dare to see if she could fit. But unfortunately, the dumb waiter was broken and she falls, plummets down 30 feet to her death. And we know that from the beginning of the book. And the rest of the book is all of the different characters mourning the loss of Sarah in their different ways. And it is a very sad book. It is all about grief, but beautiful and brilliantly written, and all set in a hotel or just outside it. So I'll read you the beginning of the book because it's Sarah's voice and I think it's rather fabulous. Woo! What a fall, what a soar, what a plummet, what a dash into dark, into light, what a plunge, what a glide, thud, crash, what a drop, what a rush, what a swoop, what a fright, what a mad hush skirl, what a smash, mush, mash up, broken, gashed, what a heart in my mouth, what an end, what a life, What a time, what I felt. Then, gone. Here's the story. It starts at the end. It was the height of the summer when I fell. The leaves were on the trees. Now it's the deep of the winter. The leaves fell off long ago. And this is it, my last night. And tonight, what I want more than anything in the world is to have a stone in my shoe. To be walking along the pavement here outside the hotel and to feel a stone rattling about in my shoe as I walk. A small sharp stone so that it jags into different parts of the sole and hurts just enough to be pleasure, like scratching an itch. Imagine an itch, imagine a foot and a pavement beneath it and a stone, and pressing the stone with my whole weight hard into the skin of the sole, or against the bones of the bigger toes or the smaller toes, or the inside curve of the foot, or the heel or the small ball of muscle that keeps a body upright and balanced and moving across the breathtaking, still hard surface of the world. Because now that my breath, you might say, has been taken, I miss such itching detail all the time. I don't want anything but it. I worry endlessly at detail that would never have concerned me, not even for a moment of when I was still alive. For example, just for peace of mind, my fall. I would like very much to know how long it took, how long exactly, and I'd do it again in a minute, given the chance, the gift of a chance, the chance of a living minute. 60 whole seconds, so many. Given only a fraction of what my full weight behind me again, if I could, and this time I'd throw myself willingly down it. Woo! Woo! And this time I'd count as I went, one elephant, two elephant. If I could feel it again, how I hit the basement from 4 floors up, from toe to head, dead, dead leg, dead arm, dead hand, dead eye, dead eye. 4 floors between me and the world. That's all it took to take me. That's the measure of it, the length and depth of it, the short, good, and so on. You get a really good flavour of the book, I feel, from that little section. Each of the chapters is written by a different person, and that one is the most unusually written because the girl who's telling the story is dead. She's a ghost, and she's describing the moment of her death as she plunges down the dumb waiter. But I absolutely love it and find it really poetic and brilliant. Other people might find the style jarring, but I would thoroughly recommend giving it a go because I think it is an excellent novel and very readable. So, moving on to another hotel novel, Hotel Alpha by Mark Watson, who is a comedian who's written several novels, both for adults and children. Hotel Alpha is all about the most extraordinary hotel in London, founded 3 decades ago by Howard York, a self-made man. He believes that you create your own luck, and when he's in the room, there's a sense that anything is possible. Now, Graham, the concierge, has been behind the Alpha's front desk since the day the hotel opened and knows everything about it. Chaz, Howard's blind adopted son, has almost never ventured outside its walls. Both of them believe that the Alpha gives them everything they need until 2 mysterious disappearances raise questions that no one seems willing to answer. As the years forge ahead, Graham and Chaz must ask themselves whether Howard's vision of the perfect hotel has been built on secrets or dreams or both. So, Hotel Alpha is a great, really fun and gripping novel. And it also has an accompanying book, which is 100 Hotel Alpha stories, in which Mark Watson has taken each door of the hotel and found the person behind that door and told their story. So every room of the Hotel Alpha has witnessed hundreds of stories, some incidental, some life-changing, some more dramatic than others, and many of them intertwined in ways that the guests couldn't possibly know. So here, Mark Watson has great fun interweaving all the different stories and the different characters from the hotel that he created in Hotel Alpha. So um, Mark Watson had a lot of fun with that whole idea. And apparently, he says that he based the idea partially on a book that I really love, which is called Life, a User's Manual, La Vie, Mode d'Emploi, by Georges Perec, which is a novel set in an apartment block in Paris, in which we get to go behind every door in the apartment block and enter into the lives of each of those people and see how they live, how they have different and disparate lives, but also how they interweave and interact. And that's not a book about a hotel, so I'm not going to go into it in depth. But it's interesting that Mark Watson was inspired by that book because it is an absolutely brilliant book, which in a way represents all human life by having an apartment block with all these very different people in it. And Hotel Alpha is a similar kind of idea, but set in a hotel. So, thinking of hotel literature, it would be terribly remiss to miss out the fabulous A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, which I'm sure many of you have read. It was a huge word of mouth sensation about 6 years ago when it came out. And it was also a massively successful book club book. It's a really great, possibly some would say it takes a little bit of time to get into. When I first picked up A Gentleman in Moscow, it did take me probably 50 pages to get swept up and captivated by it, but once I was there, I completely loved it. It's a really beautifully written novel which immerses us in an elegantly drawn era with the story of Count Alexander Rostov. In 1922, Count Alexander is deemed an unrepentant aristocrat by a Bolshevik tribunal, and the Count is sentenced to house arrest in the Metropole, a grand hotel across the street from the Kremlin. So, obviously, we're in Moscow. Rostov, an indomitable man of erudition and wit, has never worked a day of his life, and he must now live in an attic room with some of the most tumultuous decades in Russian history unfolding outside the hotel's doors. He has to stay in one hotel room for 30 years. And when you hear this and think, how can this be a great and brilliant novel? I fully relate to that question. But Count Alexander is such great company. We love being inside his head. He tells us all about his previous life, and he also makes relationships with the people in the hotel. And although he's meant to be under house arrest and staying in just one place, in one room, he actually does have quite a lot of freedom to roam the hotel, although it changes over the years. And I won't give away what happens, but it does become a totally gripping novel. So I'm going to read you a section of it to give you a sense of the way Amor Towles writes. And it is definitely my favourite of Amor Towles' books, but he has written several other novels which are also fabulous. This is quite near the beginning when the Count has only just been confined to his quarters in. 1 hour later, as the Count bounced twice on his new mattress to identify the key of the bed springs, G sharp, he surveyed the furniture that had been stacked around him and reminded himself how, as a youth, he had longed for trips to France by steamship and Moscow by the overnight train. And why had he longed for those particular journeys? Because their berths had been so small. What a marvel it had been to discover the table that folded away without a trace, and the drawers built into the base of the bed, and the wall-mounted lamps just large enough to illuminate a page. This efficiency of design was music to the young mind. It attested to a precision of purpose and the promise of adventure. For such would have been the quarters of Captain Nemo when he journeyed 20,000 Leagues Beneath the Sea. And wouldn't any young boy with the slightest gumption gladly trade 100 nights in a palace for one aboard the Nautilus? Well, at long last, here he was. That's one of the things I love about Count Alexander, is that he has an amazing ability to make the best of things. So he's just been confined into tiny quarters, having been a rich aristocrat with enormous wealth, enormous amounts of possessions, and several large houses. And now he has to measure his life in the confines of a very tiny berth. And he's likening it to an adventure on board the Nautilus in the novel Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And this is what makes him such a great character and such great company, because he's always so positive, even though there's awful things going on around him. Besides, with half the rooms on the second floor temporarily commandeered by the Bolsheviks for the tireless typing of directives, at least on the sixth floor, a man could hear himself think. The Count stood and banged his head on the slope of the ceiling. Just so, he replied, easing one of the high-backed chairs aside and moving the elephant lamps to the bed. The Count opened his trunk. First, he took out the photograph of the delegation and placed it on the desk where it belonged. Then he took out the 2 bottles of brandy and his father's twice. But when he took out his grandmother's opera glasses and placed them on the desk, a fluttering drew his attention towards the dormer. Though the window was only the size of a dinner invitation, the Count could see that a pigeon had landed outside on the copper stripping of the ledge. "Why, hello," said the Count. "How kind of you to stop by." The pigeon looked back with a decidedly proprietary air. Then it scuffed the flashing with its claws and thrust its beak at the window several times in quick succession. "Ah, yes," conceded the Count. "There is something in what you say." He was about to explain to his new neighbour the cause of his unexpected arrival, when from the hallway came the delicate clearing of a throat. I'll leave it there. But it's a fabulously written, beautiful book with many a meandering conversational moment, which does take you through the history of Russia and Moscow between about 1922 and 1945, I do believe. But it's a really excellent read, and I would thoroughly recommend it to anyone that hasn't read it yet. Cheers. Here's to Count Alexander, one of my favourite characters in literature in the last 10 years. And the hotel in the book, by the way, is a really fantastic character. We get to see quite a lot of different areas of the hotel, different parts of the hotel which you would never have thought of have existed. The lifts, the airing cupboards, the cutlery cupboards, the trolleys, all the different aspects of a hotel, which you would not really think about until you read a great novel about it. Now, on another chilling note, I would love to share with you one more hotel, which is from the great Roald Dahl. In this collection, Tales of the Unexpected, we have The Landlady. I don't know if you are familiar with this story, and I don't want to give away spoilers for people that haven't read it, but it's a deeply sinister tale, and it's not necessarily technically a hotel, it's more of a B&B kind of place. But as it was writing about a time like maybe the 1970s, the distinction was not quite so great as perhaps it is now. I'm going to read you a little bit of it because Roald Dahl, I do think, is one of the best and greatest storytellers of the last 50 years. It's a very short story, which one could read the whole thing to a friend or partner in probably only about 15 to 20 minutes. And I would really recommend this whole collection as excellent read aloud stories, though be warned that pretty much all of them end in a fairly nasty way. I'll just read you the beginning. Billy Weaver, this called the landlady. Billy Weaver had travelled down from London on the slow afternoon train, with a change at Swindon on the way, and by the time he got to Bath it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and the moon was coming up out of a clear starry sky over the houses opposite the station entrance. But the air was deadly cold, and the wind was like a flat blade of ice on his cheeks. "Excuse me," he said, "but is there a fairly cheap hotel not too far away from here?" "Try the Bell and Dragon," the porter answered, pointing down the road. "They might take you in. It's about a quarter of a mile along on the other side." Billy thanked him, and picked up his suitcase and set out to walk the quarter mile to the Bell and Dragon. He'd never been to Bath before. He didn't know anyone who lived there. But Mr. Greenslade at the head office in London had told him it was a splendid city. "Find your own lodgings," he'd said, "and then go along and report to the branch manager as soon as you've got yourself settled." Billy was 17 years old. He was wearing a new navy blue overcoat, a new brown trilby hat, and a new brown suit, and he was feeling fine. He walked briskly down the street. He was trying to do everything briskly these days. Briskness, he had decided, was the one common characteristic of all successful businessmen. The big shots up at head office were absolutely fantastically brisk all the time. They were amazing. There were no shops on this wide street that he was walking along, only a line of tall houses on each side, all of them identical. They had porches and pillars and 4 or 5 steps going up to their front doors, and it was obvious that once upon a time they had been very swanky residences. But now, even in the darkness, he could see that the paint was peeling from the woodwork on their doors and windows, and that the handsome white facades were cracked and blotchy from neglect. Suddenly, in a downstairs window that was brilliantly illuminated by a street lamp not 6 yards away, Billy caught sight of a printed notice propped up against the glass in one of the upper panes. It said, "Bed and breakfast." There was a vase of pussy willows, tall and beautiful, standing just underneath the notice. He stopped walking. He moved a bit closer. Green curtains, some sort of velvety material, were hanging down on either side of the window. The pussy willows looked wonderful beside them. He went right up and peered through the glass into the room, and the first thing he saw was a bright fire burning on the hearth. On the carpet in front of the fire, a pretty little dachshund was curled up asleep, with its nose tucked into its belly. The room itself, so far as he could see in the half-darkness, was filled with pleasant furniture. There was a baby grand piano and a big sofa and several plump armchairs, and in one corner he spotted a large parrot in a cage. Animals were usually a good sign in places like this, Billy told himself, and all in all, it looked to him as though it would be a pretty decent house to stay in. Certainly, it would be more comfortable than the Bell and Dragon. Okay, I'll leave it there. As Laughing John is mentioning, it does have a deeply chilling ending. And if you know the story and you reread it, lots of those details are all the more chilling when you go back and read it again. It is a great one to read aloud. I would really recommend sharing it with someone if you can. And also then you might not be quite so chilled. But you'll definitely never look at a boarding house in quite the same way. And you definitely won't be lured in by a lovely fire and a lovely dog curled up by that fire. You certainly won't. So hotels in literature are not always to be trusted. We haven't talked about Hotel du Lac by Anita Bruckner, which is all set in a hotel that looks over Lake Geneva, which is a really beautiful setting. And it's a very lovely, quiet, calm book, although it does have deep running emotions simmering below the surface. And it is also a great novel, which I would thoroughly recommend. And it's lovely and short. So I think I've touched on all of the hotel books that I wanted to mention this evening. I would love to know if you have any interesting and exciting hotels that you'd like to share in literature. I know there's a lot more from the world of detective fiction that I haven't touched on this evening. If you have any burning hotel fiction that you'd like to tell me about, please do. And next week, I'm going to be doing madness in literature. That's my plan, anyway. And I'm not quite sure where I will be broadcasting from. Might be from London, but do join me. Do please also send me any recommendations, questions, queries, or topics that you'd like me to cover. Also, if you enjoy these sessions and you'd like to help me continue to do them, go to kofi.com. Links in my bio in Instagram and on Twitter. And you can keep me in coffee and hotel garb, possibly even in the odd room service drink. And also think about booking a bibliotherapy session with me. I do one-to-one bibliotherapy sessions. And if you're interested, just drop me an email. In the meantime, thanks so much for joining me tonight, and I will see you next week. Good night.